There's a bottleneck at the border that is expected to soon turn into a flood. That's if the administration lifts an immigration policy called Title 42. Now the Biden administration is under renewed pressure of how to handle this expected border surge. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details.
The last day for the Centers for Disease Control to review Title 42, a policy created during the start of the CCP virus pandemic. It allows for Border Patrol agents to deny entry to migrants without considering their asylum claims to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But with the White House lifting other pandemic restrictions, will they lift this one too?
When the CDC ultimately decides it's appropriate to lift Title 42, there will be an influx of people to the border. And so we are doing a lot of work to plan for that contingency.
The Department of Homeland Security is now preparing for this, including vaccinating non-citizens taken into custody, with a goal to give 6,000 vaccinations per day by the end of May. Senator Bill Hagerty wants to expand Title 42, but not to protect us from the pandemic, but for another deadly threat, fentanyl.
100,000 young people have died in America just this past year alone from drug overdoses. And this war is being waged on America by the Chinese Communist Party that are sending fentanyl and its precursors into Mexico, where they're being manufactured, and then shipping those drugs across the border, killing young people in my state.
The administration has called on the Pentagon to deploy troops to the border. They're preparing for up to 18,000 migrants per day, nearly 3 times the rate we're seeing now. In a document published today, the DHS says they're increasing temporary holding capacity to process high volumes of individuals in a humane manner. And it's not just immigrants from Central America and Mexico. There are also folks from Ukraine and Russia.
Our apartment, which we rented, it's destroyed, you know? Yeah, so we last year we lived in Kyiv and it's totally destroyed, you know, so.
And because of these issues, Senator Rob Portman says the answer is a change in asylum policy.
What you need to do is change the asylum policy, because right now we have a pull factor in our country. We are telling people if you come to the border and you claim asylum, you can come in.
Republican lawmakers have repeatedly criticized Biden's border policies. And now 2 Democrats from the border state of Arizona are also pressing for the administration for a clear action plan.
So, Melina, what can you tell us about Congress's action on immigration?
Well, Steve, it's been quite a while since Congress has taken any action on immigration policy. The last time that they actually had some solid action on this was when the House last year passed that immigration reform, Democrat-backed immigration reform bill, but that was not about border security. That was to provide a pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants. So that's the last time we saw anything related to immigration move through Congress was last year. Now, Senator John Cornyn, a Republican, did introduce, alongside his Democrat colleague from Arizona, Senator Sinema, a bipartisan bicameral immigration bill that would emphasize border security. But Senator Cornyn told me today that this has had little to no support, not enough support to pressure the leadership to take this as a priority. So that is actually stalled right now. Now, as for whether or not Democrats will be pressured to address this issue, Republicans say that they think that the upcoming midterms will pressure Democrats to address this border crisis issue. Here, Senator Ted Cruz even went as far as to make a political prediction for his home state for these midterms. Let's listen.
Is a Democratic region of the state. Historically, it's been Democrat for 100 years. My prediction is in November, you're going to see South Texas turn red.
And going back to Title 42, the White House has not yet laid out an official decision as to whether or not they'll choose to extend Title 42 or lift it, but they are facing a pressing deadline this week to decide whether they're going to extend or lift that Trump-era immigration policy. Steve, back to you.
Melina Wisecup reporting. As the number of illegal immigrants continues to surge and the prospects of that number increasing, we have Texas Congressman Chip Roy here with us to discuss. Congressman Chip Roy, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
Yeah, my pleasure as always.
Congressman, you just penned a letter to the DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas over Title 42. You said by allowing Title 42 to expire, this would be an impeachable offense. Please explain to us exactly what is Title 42 and why did you write this letter?
Well, for the people that are looking at this for the first time and don't know what Title 42 is, it's literally the only thing that is standing between us and a completely wide open border because this administration refuses to use the tools in front of it to secure the border. So let me put this in context. In March, in the first half of March, about 100,000 individuals were apprehended at our southern border. Of those, about 50,000, a little less than, were turned away under what's called Title 42. Now, the Title 42 is a part of our health codes, which have been used since the last year of the Trump administration to say that during a pandemic, during a time when America's been locked down, shut down, dealing with masks on airplanes, while there's still a public health emergency, that we should not allow people to come in during that time frame. And so this administration has been using it less than the Trump administration, but has been using it at least enough to turn away about half the folks. Now let's put that in context. In all of March, we're looking at about 200,000 people, of whom about 100,000 would be turned away under Title 42. Tomorrow, we're told the administration, led by Secretary Mayorkas's decision-making, they are going to end Title 42. Now, if they do that, that means almost all 200,000 would be caught and then released into the United States. That is a complete dereliction of duty. It is endangering the American people, and I believe it is therefore an impeachable offense of the highest order to not carry out your constitutional duty to secure the border and to do so purposefully. And that's what they're doing.
Congressman, I think it's easy to lose sight of the seriousness of certain issues because of how politicized things can be. Also, the numbers, of course, 50,000, 200,000 per month. They're large numbers, but you're only saying it right now in relation to that month. But when these months start adding up, we're talking millions. What is the net impact of these open borders on the American people, but even more so on the country as a whole?
Well, if you look at what happened last year, and these are ballpark numbers, depending on whether you're looking at the fiscal year or the calendar year, about 700,000 individuals were released into the United States. About another 500,000, give or take, were known gotaways that came into the United States. So now you're at about 1.2 million. Now what we're talking about, though, is if you take Title 42 away, last year that would have meant upwards of about another million people would have come into the United States, almost all of whom would have been Title 8 released. So what does that add up to? Well over 2 million people illegally coming to the United States, claiming asylum, and this administration refusing to use our asylum laws properly, catching and releasing people, and not even now being willing to use Title 42. What does that mean? That means cartels are empowered, they're enriched, more of these migrants are put into the sex trafficking trade and endangered. They're putting in stash houses along the border or in Houston, Texas, or in San Antonio, which I represent. And now we have hundreds of thousands, or certainly tens of thousands, 100,000 Americans that have died from drug poisonings and drug overdoses, driven almost entirely by synthetic fentanyl from China coming up through Mexico with these now newly empowered and enriched cartels. Americans are dying, we're getting harmed, farmers are getting their fences cut, livestock's getting out, we're endangered, we don't know who else coming across, 500,000 gotaways, a lot of those are from about 150 countries all over the world. That is your current administration refusing to do its job. Secretary Mayorkas should be impeached for all of that activity, but in particular this week, walking away from Title 42.
Congressman Chip Roy, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
The military's COVID-19 vaccine mandate has been blocked for all members of the Navy seeking religious exemptions. A preliminary injunction that previously covered 35 Navy SEALs now covers about 4,000 others who are seeking religious exemption. U.S. District Judge Reed O'Connor, a George W. Bush appointee, issued the order. O'Connor expanded the ruling in part because each of the original 35 who applied for the exemption never received the accommodation. In his order, O'Connor wrote that the threat to each person is the same: get the jab or lose your job. The Supreme Court recently sided with the Pentagon, ruling that Navy commanders can consider vaccination status before deploying a SEAL for missions. But O'Connor's order will prevent the Navy from firing unvaccinated members whose religious exemptions got denied. On Tuesday, Senator Joe Manchin rejected President Biden's billionaire tax proposal. That proposal included a 20% minimum tax on households worth over $100 million and was part of Biden's 2023 budget proposal. Biden was hoping to gain $360 billion in revenue with a billionaire tax, which included taxing unrealized gains. In other words, a tax on the increase in value of an investment even when it hasn't been sold. Manchin says taxes must be based on income. The West Virginian Democrat told The Hill this week that you can't tax something that's not earned. Russia and China's foreign ministers say the two countries will further widen their cooperation. A poll shows a majority of Americans agree with sanctioning Beijing if it does aid Moscow's invasion. Moscow and Beijing have agreed to expand cooperation. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov delivered a message at a conference in eastern China when he met with his Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi. Commenting on the situation, a Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman restated the regime's no-limit ties with Russia. In an earlier phone call with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Biden also warned of consequences if he chooses to support Putin. Within the United States, a majority favors sanctions against China if it does provide support to Russia. A recent poll shows some 78% of Republicans, 70% of Democrats, and 76% of independents are all in agreement. The Chinese Communist Party has been benefiting from something called preferential trade status, and for decades has been taking advantage of countries around the world for its own gain. We had a chance to sit down with Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany to see how that might be changing. Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report again.
It's good to be back with NTD.
Congressman, you've recently joined an effort to revoke China's preferential trade status. Please tell us exactly what this would do and why it's important.
So this is going to be bipartisan legislation that would remove the permanent free trade status, most favored nation status, that China has at this point. And they've had it for about 2 decades. And I think it's important because China has proven that they're not willing to respect human rights, intellectual property, they threaten their neighbors. I mean, there's a number of things that I believe they are not doing that free nations around the world believe in. And so therefore, we should have a vote annually, and that's what the legislation proposes, is that the president would have to come back to Congress on an annual basis to get this vote that they would have most favored nation status.
It's a great sign that this is bipartisan and that more Democrats are joining in. Do you see more Democrats than what you already have starting to join this effort?
Yeah, we're certainly seeing a bipartisan push and more Democrats that are understanding, especially with China threatening their neighbor Taiwan, democracy basically no longer existing in Hong Kong. And as we're hearing continued stories about the ethnic Uyghurs and the Falun Gong being suppressed, in some instances enslaved, I think both Republicans and some Democrats understand that that's not acceptable, especially for us to give them most favored nation status, which has certainly benefited Wall Street over the last 20 years, but has it benefited the average American? And I think more and more people are saying that's not the case.
It seems like House Republicans, including yourself, are taking China very seriously. You have Leader McCarthy that has just recently organized a China task force. He also says that if the Republicans take the House, which is looking likely right now, that he would consider adding a committee specifically to deal with China. Is there a consensus among your colleagues?
I believe there is. I mean, just yesterday in Judiciary, we had a gentleman who's an expert in cybersecurity with the FBI, and I posed the question, who is most dangerous in terms of countries that would that threaten our cybersecurity? And he said, without a doubt, it's China. Certainly Russia, Iran, and North Korea are on that list, but China is clearly number one. And I think that's very indicative of how we have to take this seriously. Is the 21st century going to be an American century like the 20th century was, and people who believe in the free world, or is it going to be a suppression Chinese century where they suppress human rights?
Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you.
It's always good to be here.